Welcome everybody to Hawthorn Farm, our first Hawthorn Farm class of the year. We're so excited that you all could join us today. My name's Becca. I work at 21 Acres, and we are on the call with Hawthorn Farm, Alexia, Allen, and Daniel Kirchhof, who are going to share more with you in just a minute. We definitely encourage discussion. We want you guys to ask questions as they come up. So until you're speaking, just please mute yourself. And then if you plan to speak, just unmute yourself. You can also use the chat feature over here, which I know a few of you are already using. And I'm going to be there and can answer questions as well. This call is hosted by 21 Acres. 21 Acres is a living laboratory focused on learning as a community about agroecology, green building, and local food systems, our solutions to climate change. We're located in Woodinville, Washington, in a valley that was originally home to the Stillaguamish, Duwamish, and Coast Salish peoples. So we always just like to acknowledge those tribes as the original inhabitants and stewards of this land, and honor and respect the heritage of elders past and present. So we're super excited to get going. So I'm going to hand it off to Hawthorn Farm now, and we're excited to learn from you today.
Thank you so much, Becca. It's really a treat to be here and on this amazing Western Washington snowy day. And it's so nice to see faces and names I know, some dear friends and some brand new folks, dear friends yet to be. So thank you all for joining us here today and diving into some of the specifics of garden magic. And Daniel's the garden muse here and does a lot of the gardening infrastructure. Is there anything you want to say starting out?
I just wanted to say hi to folks and to encourage people to join in next month for my class on ducks versus chicken, backyard poultry. I won't be visible much during this class today, but wanted to put in a word for that. And to also encourage people to have a pen and paper, though you can catch the recording later on the 21 Acres website. We're recording this, so if you don't want to be on the recording, click your camera off, but we're going to record this. It's being recorded so that people who didn't make it can also join later. But take good notes. She's got a lot to share today. And I've already watched this presentation a couple of times, so you're in good hands.
All right. See you later, Daniel. On to this PowerPoint presentation. This is a new technological leap for me. So let me know how it goes.
It's looking great on my end.
Okay. So far, so good? Fantastic. Well, let's dive into Garden Planning and Soil Health 101, which is a little bit like saying becoming a concert pianist and learning how to be a relationship in a long-term marriage 101. Like, this is actually a very expansive, in-depth personal topic, and I'm really just here to provide you some inspiration and point you in the direction of some awesome resources. And I do hope that in this presentation, in this next hour together, whether you're a brand new gardener or whether you've been gardening for 10 or 20 years, you will have some takeaway tidbit that you can glean from this. So I call this presentation the art of delayed gratification. For me, that's a lot of what the gardening journey has been for me. If I want to make a tomato salad, I have to think about it in February and plant the seeds and grow the tomatoes and then eat my tomato salad in maybe late June if I'm lucky. So that's why there are so many steps that result in good health for your soil and good health for you eating from your soil, not just next week, but in years to come. So that is a big part of what influences my garden planning. Who am I? How do I relate to the soil? And who do I want to be in 5, 10, 20 years as I continue to be in relationship with my soil? And of course, what do you want to grow in your garden? Where do you want to grow it? And why are you gardening? So these are just a few questions to consider in your personal journey. And I know some of you have done garden consulting with me already, and you're going to get another dose of all my questions here. So let's start out with me and why I'm gardening. I've been dabbling in gardening over many years, probably the past 15 or so. And when Daniel visited me about 10 years ago and said, let's eat everything that we can from the garden, that spiraled, just snowballed into spending the entire year of 2017 eating only hand harvested food, zero grocery store involvement. So we were harvesting apples and growing all the food that we could, and we had prepared for this challenge, and we'd preserved food, and we were growing food throughout the year. And I loved it. Like, this was just incredible. People would visit us and say, your fridge is empty. What's the deal? And I would say, well, it's all out in the garden. We actually are harvesting things fresh for just about every meal. And I noticed in myself over that year, and in actually pretty much every other year of my life, that I was developing food cravings. Like, oh, I just have to eat more of these dried apples because I don't have anything else and I'm hungry and I don't know why. And through some great resources that I'll mention later, and especially Steve Solomon's book, The Intelligent Gardener, I realized that there were mineral deficiencies in the soil in my garden. And because I was eating so much from my garden, those were showing up in my body. Now, of course, all of us are probably eating from soils that are imbalanced in some way. And we as home gardeners have the power to make our soil so awesome that it really easily grows nutritious and delicious food. Because think about it, in the system we live in, farmers have an incentive to grow as much food as they can, not as nutritious food as they can. So they are fertilizing and they are emphasizing for yields, for bushels per acre. That is a different bar to reach than how healthy are the people who are eating this food from my land. So imagine a wheat field in eastern Washington. There's going to be a certain amount of a mineral called phosphorus in that soil. All the little wheat plants send their roots down, take up phosphorus, and put it into their seeds. And then those seeds get harvested and carried away to make bread and feed people in other places. That soil is getting more and more depleted of that mineral, just to give you an example. And it costs a lot, and it's kind of a hassle and a whole different way of thinking for farmers who are farming thousands of acres potentially to remineralize the soils they farm on. I have rented farmland and I've done the math, and it gets prohibitively expensive to, really amend and grow nutrient dense food on multiple acres. But in your home garden, it's a snap. It's totally worth it. It's not going to cost a lot, and it's going to give you incredible nutrition. So here's the list of takeaways, because as I mentioned, this is a huge topic. So I just start with watching your garden. You have a relationship with your garden, and it's up to you to spend time nourishing that relationship. Like, if someone came to me for marriage advice and said, like, just give me a list of what I should do, that's not really as effective as me saying, okay, you've got to spend time with this other person in your relationship. And it's kind of like that with the garden. Spend time with your garden. Think about what you want. Notice where the sunlight is. Notice where the wind is coming from. Notice where the runoff is coming off of your roof. Just notice what is actually there, because that's what the plants are doing. They are going to respond to what is actually there, not what you think should be there. Spend time and notice it, and you become the authority on your garden space. Now, I resisted a soil test for many years. It's been a game changer. I use Logan Labs because the analyzing software I use only works with Logan Labs results. You basically want to compare apples to apples in terms of the soil test you use. I'll talk more about that later. Amend thoughtfully. You can't just add any old stuff to your garden and expect it to perform well year after year. I'm not saying only use organics or forget about organics or, I'm just saying be thoughtful and considerate about what you add. More is not always better. Another great garden planning and soil health tip, cover crops. I'll talk again more in depth about them, but that is something to research. It's been very, very helpful for our gardens here in Western Washington. And again, as you incorporate all those, think about what you want, keep watching your garden. I don't get tired of the endless dramas that are out there. And every year brings new lessons, new things to try, new iterations of knowledge. So far, so good. Are you in the right place? Great. Okay, so talking a little bit about garden planning and thinking ahead. Again, this was something I resisted for a long time, in part because I had no idea what I was doing. I really started out with so little knowledge, and I'm still learning all the time. And a little bit of forethought goes a long way. For instance, if you don't like beets, don't grow beets. This is your garden. This is your art project. You get to put in there what you want and figure out what is important to you in your garden. Some people have said, oh, I'm going to grow all my lettuce from April to October, or I really love tomatoes, and anywhere I have extra space, I'm going to plant more tomatoes. Or I want to grow zucchini for the whole neighborhood. Whatever your priorities are, focus on those. And here's another garden planning hint, succession planning. And I say this because this was new to me when I started. I would plant a whole bunch of lettuce in April, and then we would eat a whole bunch of lettuce in June, and we would have no lettuce the rest of the year. Oops. How about if I just plant 20 to 40 lettuce seeds every 2 weeks through the growing season? Lo and behold, we have a fresh salad every day, pretty much through the growing season. I could go out right now in the snow and pick a fresh lettuce salad out of the greenhouse. Something like sweet corn is where you can plant varieties that mature at different times, and then you can eat this chunk of sweet corn, and then 3 weeks later you eat this patch, and then another 3 weeks you eat this other patch. So you're not faced with a whole big glut at once. Some plants need to be planted in one great big batch in a limited window, at least at the latitude where I'm gardening. There are only so many frost-free days from the spring to the fall. And if I don't get my flint corn or my popcorn or my winter squash or my tomatoes planted in that late April to late May window, I'm just not going to be able to mature those crops up here. So there are certain crops that we do in a great big batch. And like you saw on one of the previous slides, we just store all those winter squash all winter long. So that's not something that we have growing fresh. That's something that we devote a lot of space to in the growing season. And then we just eat all those squash until about April. And then there are some crops that are in between. If I want potatoes for potato salad in July, I plant some potatoes early. If I want potatoes for roast potatoes in January, I plant those potatoes late so that I have different batches of potatoes maturing at different times. Similar thing with cabbage. Summer coleslaw cabbage gets planted early, like March, and fall sauerkraut cabbage gets planted June or July. So I kind of work backwards from when do I want to eat this? When do I need to plant it? And when can I plant it in my garden, like with the weather conditions I have? So all those factors come in. It's like living in a great big edible crossword puzzle is how I view it. So some of the key things that you need to know for your garden are your first and last frost dates. That's just some really basic stuff to help set you up for success. If you don't know those, find those out so that you're not planting really tender plants when they're going to get nipped by a frost.
And take notes.
Take notes. Things are changing. You know, it's, of course, the first and last frosts are never at the same time every year, with global weirding happening over the past at least a decade I've been gardening. Those dates can be very variable. So you're kind of gambling when you're really getting precise about those frost dates. They're never going to be at the same time every year. If you like Excel spreadsheets, this is an example of one. This is just a little slice of my garden planning Excel sheets from last year. So for instance, in the Northeast garden, where I was growing greens, salad stuff, and zucchini, in May, I needed to direct sow 3 feet of radishes and 3 feet of salad carrots at the start of the month and the middle of the month. And then I direct sowed 3 feet of radishes twice in June. And this is to keep us, it's doing that succession planting of keeping us in salad radishes. So you can see that I just kind of did these broad brush strokes, and it helped me think about what we needed and what we wanted to prioritize. I don't make plans so that I can follow them. I make plans so that I minimize my chances of forgetting stuff. I asked Daniel to make me a big long list of how much of which vegetable he wants at which times, and then I factor that all into my maps here, along with things like which plants need a lot of water. I'm going to put them where they're easy to water. Which plants don't need water, I'll put them way out where the hose doesn't reach. Does that make sense so far? All right. So if you are a visual person, here's another way I plan the garden. Now, the house is in the middle of that circle. We're just surrounded by gardens. And I do multiple of these little sketches. I'll do like 10 or 15 or 20 of these little sketches over the course of a winter. And these are all our garden patches with just written in there what I want to grow. And you can see written in there in blue, providing for the household with excess going to a farm stand. That was our 2020 garden vision to help focus what we planted where. So just a few examples. Potatoes do not need much irrigation. Here's a row of potatoes, I think in June. Hilled these up, and you see the soil mounded up around them. Basically, we can grow potatoes without needing to irrigate them if we just keep weeds out of there and we pile the soil up, pile all the nice moist spring soil around the potato plants. And then we just step back and let them do their thing. And then we just go dig up food. That's great. That works pretty well. Whereas our little friend over there on the right, who's one of our garden helpers, needs to be watered every single day. So the hose goes right out there. Or something like lettuce really needs to get watered regularly and have extra attention. A few examples of garden plants. So you wouldn't want to necessarily put your potatoes right next to your lettuce. Then you've got to water the lettuce, but you don't need to water the potatoes. So just make things easier on yourself and group plants with similar needs. Okay, now on to soil testing. It is not scary. It is a lot of numbers, but it's super duper worth it. And again, I use Logan Labs, and then I analyze the results with a program called OrganiCalc that is available at growabundant.com. And this is just what I use. There are other systems out there, but Lisa, I heard you mention getting a soil test from the university, I think. And those results, that lab is going to use a different process and give you different numbers than if you then went and got a test at Logan Lab. So you'd look at you might send the same soil sample, like the same bucket of soil, to 2 different labs and get different results. Soil science is variable. Like, this is a very, very complex system we're working with if you really try to break it down into bits and pieces. But if you use the same lab and they're using a consistent process from year to year, you'll be able to compare apples to apples and say, okay, my Logan Labs results from 2018 said that I was low in calcium, so I added calcium to my soil. And hey, my results from 2020 say I have plenty of calcium. Awesome. That makes sense. Like, that's congruent. It gets trickier if you start switching labs, but it's all good information too. I've used a variety of labs and kind of just been interested in what I find, but this is what I use and this is what I'm sticking with. And kind of like I mentioned with the phosphorus and with those wheat plants and growing your own veggies, if you don't have a reasonable balance of soil minerals, your food is not going to be nutritious. That's just how it is. And it has to do with parent geology, like what rocks are your soil formed from? And it has to do with the history of the land. Was somebody cropping hay off of this field for the past 30 years and the soil is very depleted? All those nutrients have gotten shipped away? Get a soil test and find out. And that way you can add certain amendments thoughtfully in a way that restores a particular balance, especially of calcium and magnesium. And I won't get into it too much except to say that the bags of fertilizer at the store often say NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. And yes, plants need those things, but they and you need a whole lot more. You need different trace elements. You need calcium and magnesium in certain proportions in your garden to really grow the happiest, most nutritious vegetables, which is not the same thing as the absolute biggest vegetables. Might be, but not necessarily. A big vegetable is not always a nutritious vegetable. So, I'm not an agronomist, and maybe you haven't gotten a soil test yet, but I have rarely met a Pacific Northwest soil that didn't benefit from a little agricultural lime and a little azomite or kelp. So if you're like, oh gosh, I'm just gardening on 15 square feet and I don't really want to spend the $25 to get the soil test, but I'll spend $8 on this bag of agricultural lime, 50 pounds of it, and I'll sprinkle a quart of it around and see what happens. That's probably going to be just fine. And I use azomite, which is mined in Utah from an old seafloor for trace minerals, and that has been hugely helpful, like significant increase in the health and the deliciousness of the veggies. Yeah. Kelp meal is also great, also full of good trace nutrients. It's way more expensive than azomite. And I haven't noticed a difference in how they actually perform in the garden, but I do feed kelp meal free choice to our animals. And so their manures and their products are going to be healthier for us and for the land. Like my goat milk, the milk from my goats tastes better when they eat kelp meal. So I'm guessing that I'm getting some good trace minerals through that goat milk. This is like one big cool system that we're in. And when you just add the right chemistry to it, like definitely there's an upshift in the health and vitality of your soil. Any questions on this? I know these are some broad brushstrokes, but I want to give you some places to look into.
You said that it's the health of the plant or the nutrient richness of it is not necessarily about the size of it. So maybe you could have a really big plant that's not particularly nutritious. So I guess what I'm curious is if you have a low nutrient soil, what kinds of things would you maybe notice in your plants?
Right, because they could be stunted, but is that because, like, what are they missing that would make them look that way? So something that you'll see in soils, you'll notice the texture of them. I remember when I came to your place with the shovel, you know, I'm kind of like digging around and I'm feeling it underfoot. If the soil is really tight, it's probably lacking calcium. If there are a lot of weeds taking over, it could be lacking certain minerals. Like wherever we've spread wood chips and we have low calcium and high potassium in the soil, we get amazing amounts of buttercup growing. Yeah, I'll talk more about this in our next slide. I think it's a great question.
Can I
I
ask a
see
quick?
that Angela had a question. Yeah, go ahead,
Oh,
Angela.
I'm just wondering if when you get your soil tested, so we have kind of a typical lot in Cottage Lake area,
Mhm.
do you find different deficits in different areas of the yard? And how do you address that? Do you get one soil test? Do you pay for 5?
It kind of boils down to how much I want to spend on soil tests and how homogeneous the soil is. I used to treat my gardens more individually. And now I walk around and I'll dig up 20 little shovelfuls of dirt from 6 inches down all throughout the gardens. And I mix them all together in one big bucket. And then I send 2 cups of that soil off to the lab. So I'm getting an average.
Excellent.
It's probably going to give me a good enough result. Like if it says that there's probably not an area of my garden that has way too much calcium and another area that has way too little.
Okay.
So I'm happy averaging them all together, especially in the early stages of gardening. A lot of it boils down to the parent soil that's already there. And I try not to dig up soil from like right where I had a compost pile or right where we spilled a bag of chicken feed or right where we spilled a bag of oyster shell, so that I'm getting a good representative sample.
Mhm.
Does that help?
Thank you. Very helpful.
Okay. And the Logan Labs website has all their testing guidelines on there, you know, how to gather a soil sample, and you send it in this kind of bag. And so, yeah, you'll find what you need.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So the standard organics for decades have been a lot about adding more organic matter to the soil. Just add more manure, just add more leaves, just pile on some more mulch. Well, that can exacerbate soil imbalances for you. This front garden in the picture here has way more potassium than I would like it to have, because I was blithely adding more and more compost and more manure for years and years. And I would grow beets the size of my head. They were incredible. But the next year, that same soil would just grow this tiny, shrivelly little beet that tasted like dirt. It was not very good at all. And I realized, gosh, I'm just on this treadmill of having to add more and more manure all the time. So that's when I started looking into balancing the minerals in the soil, adding just enough manure or compost, you know, some kind of fertilizer to really ramp up the plants who need it, but not adding any more, not just piling on as much as I possibly can. You also get what you pay for when it comes to buying soil. I've had 2 immediate neighbors say, oh, I got this great deal on a truckload of soil. I'm going to fill all my garden tubs with it. I'm going to fill my raised beds with it. It didn't grow diddly squat. It was sand and wood chips mixed together. It was not soil. Like there wasn't an earthworm in the whole darn thing. So it's worth investing in good soil and then in taking good care of it. So just be aware of probably getting what you pay for when it comes to soil. And that's why I like to just emphasize, what can I add cheaply and simply to the soil I already have, and go from there. Now I'm gardening a good acre-ish of land, so it adds up and it makes more sense. And if you're gardening in a container, great. You can get awesome soil. You can take great care of those plants. You can grow herbs in your window box and rock on. And you probably don't need to buy a ton of amendments. You can, what I'm mentioning about adding some of those trace minerals, keep making sure your calcium is topped up, is going to go a long way to extending the lifespan of any soil you buy. And in your garden planning, make your rows easy to work in. These curved rows are pretty darn cool, and it did work. Just think about what's going to be ergonomic for you and where you can get a wheelbarrow easily. Just saying. Okay, I saw that some folks had questions about soil prep. And again, the answer is it depends. And it boils down to what you hope to accomplish. Do you want to turn lawn into a brand new garden? Do you want to get ready to plant in the springtime? Do you want to get ready to plant in the fall? And what are you growing there? Certain vegetables are finicky and fussy and they want a lot of soil prep. If you're putting tiny, tiny little lettuce seeds into the soil, that better be pretty nice, fluffy, fine soil. And if you're putting big old tomato transplants in, you can just like chunk a hole in the compost pile and shove them in. I'm looking to do as little work as possible for the maximum effect. I'm not interested in doing any more work than I have to. I gardened for about 80% of my calories for me and for a 9-person household. I want to get more calories out than I'm putting in. And it's a fact that turning over the soil and tillaging damages soil structure. I might need to do it, but I want to do it as absolutely little as possible and as shallowly as possible. Gosh, maybe 15 years ago, rented a rototiller, because that's what gardeners are supposed to do. Rototilled the garden. It was beautiful and fluffy for 2 weeks, and then it settled into a basketball court. And that's what I'm mitigating there in that picture on the right with the ponies. That's some of the land that I rented that was pretty darn basketball court. So we're going over with the ponies, who weigh a lot less than a big tractor, and just scratching up that surface layer of the soil so that we can plant. Because carrots don't want to grow next to a bunch of weeds. You can't put a corn seed on a lawn and expect that corn plant to really thrive. So when we've been converting lawn into gardens, we often do an initial tilling, and the horses have been great at that. The horses partner with us. Chickens make great partners. If you have chickens in a pen and you leave that pen on your lawn long enough, it will no longer be lawn, and you have an opportunity to turn it into a very fertile garden patch. We use a sharp hoe. And I know I've mentioned to some of you, a sharp hoe is your friend. Nice long handle at the right angle, ergonomic, and we keep weeds out of the garden, just slicing the top layer of the soil. Don't want to dig down and bring up a bunch of ancient buried weed seeds. They last for years and years in the soil. Just want to sweep those weeds off the top. Also, getting that soil test and having those minerals present in your soil is going to help a lot. Calcium will help that soil be fluffy. This rented land was very, very dense. I said, I bet it's going to show up high in magnesium on the soil test. And sure enough, it did. And adding calcium helped a lot to make that soil drain better and be fluffier. So let the chemistry and the earthworms do the work. There's no way you can fluff up the soil yourself. I mean, kale roots go down, what, 8 feet? What are you going to do? Dig down 8 feet and fluff all that up? You can't. Like, that's way more effort than the energy you're going to get from growing the kale plant. So get the soil chemistry right. The soil biology will flourish. All kinds of earthworms will be making tunnels through there. Roots are going to penetrate down. You'll be in good shape. It just might take a little bit, you might need a year or two to really see the effects, the beneficial effects keep snowballing. Sheet mulching is great. Be aware that it can exacerbate nutrient imbalances. Again, if you're just bringing in a whole bunch of leaves, who knows where those trees grew, you might get yourself into a bind. Not usually in the first year or two, but just don't keep doing it every single year. And of course, slugs, voles, rats have all happily taken up residence underneath sheet mulching here and potentially at your place too. And if you're going to plant in the spring, you pretty much should have sheet mulched in the fall. All hope is not lost. You can go ahead and do it now. There's no bad time, but just think about that too. All right, some pictures from the garden yesterday before the snow fell. So Marley there on the right is showcasing a bed that's been covered with old greenhouse plastic. We weeded the bed, cover it, to keep the rain off, encourage a new flush of weeds. We'll peel the plastic off, hoe it again, cover it back up, and then maybe do that another time or two and then plant artichokes there. So that is the retirement plan for our greenhouse plastic, which I buy the highest quality greenhouse plastic I possibly can. It's twice as much as the cheapo stuff, but it lasts 5 times as long. So seems like a good value to me. If I'm going to be importing petroleum products into my garden, I want to make sure that they are worth it to the absolute best of my ability, and they're also not crumbling into little annoying bits all over the garden. Take on the amount of garden that you can manage. The other picture is of Marley in our garden, one of the main garden spaces. It's a pretty big swath of the garden, and you can see snow on the Brussels sprouts and the kale plants, and she's standing next to the greenhouse that is, appropriately enough, full of greens. So, like I mentioned, the garden plan that you make reflects you as an individual and your values and priorities. We value year-round fresh veggies. So, Marley's holding some tasty, sweet, crunchy daikon radishes, and then she's in the greenhouse next to multiple winter hardy varieties of plants. Mizunas and 2 different kinds of lettuce and endives and baby kale and all kinds of good stuff there because we want year-round salads. So that's what we grow. Okay, on to takeaway number 4, cover crops. So in terms of garden planning and soil health, this is where the rubber meets the road. I talked about how adding random amounts of any old organic matter is not always the best plan. But soil needs organic matter. So how are you going to do that? Planting cover crops is magic. I can plant a handful of rye seeds and then grow like 70 pounds of biomass from those rye plants. And I didn't have to carry all that stuff to the garden. I just carried the handful of seeds. How awesome is that? I like getting amazing food from awesome soil without having to do a whole bunch of work. So cover crops are part of that. Cover crops are non-food plants grown to enhance the soil. Although, as these kids are demonstrating, they can also be food. I just throw edible plants into my cover crop mixes for us to snack on through the winter. So things like arugula and baby kale, chickweed, crimson clover, mustard oats, all these things go into my winter cover crop mixes. And some cover crops are great over the winter, like crimson clover, and some are only for the warm season, things like buckwheat or sun hemp. If I had to choose only 2 cover crops, it would be crimson clover and buckwheat. And they're often sold by the pound at garden stores or feed stores. So you can just get a small amount if you have a small garden. Nature abhors a vacuum. If there is bare soil, one of 2 things is going to happen. Weeds are going to move in, and or the soil is going to get compacted by rain. Especially around here, we have so much rain over the winter time, and all that drumming on the soil just compacts it down. So the cover crops are a way to keep the soil alive, to have roots in that soil, to keep nutrients from washing away, to keep topsoil from eroding. And it's just so much easier to plant a good crop in the spring, provided you don't let the cover crops get out of hand. Some of them, like rye, it's hard to hoe down mature rye. Make sure that you get it while it's still young, like that you're actually killing it while it's still young. And at certain times of year, what might be a weed in the spring becomes a cover crop in the fall. I'm like, okay, in the spring, I would totally hoe chickweed out of the garden because it's going to go to seed and everything. But in the fall, it makes a great soil cover as long as I weed it out of there before it goes to seed and makes 100 more little chickweed plants around. So this is where you get to know your garden. You get to know which weeds are delicious and edible and you can eat them all winter long, and which weeds you really want to get out of there ASAP. So it's fun. There's like this whole cast of characters out in the garden all the time. Oh my gosh, time's flying.
I see a couple questions in the chat, Alexia, if you want to answer. Yeah, so first question is where and what brand to buy azomite?
Mm-hmm.
And then the other question is, what do you do with cover crops when it's time to plant? Do you remove and compost them?
Great questions. So azomite is the brand name. And I have gotten it at garden stores, feed stores. It's a pretty well-known thing. I think they'll ship you a bunch of it, but you could probably call around to your local garden stores and say, hey, I want azomite. Do you have it, or can I special order a bag on your next pallet load? And it's usually less than 20 bucks for a bag, at least around here. So great bang for your buck. Yeah, azomite's the brand. And then, so here comes springtime, you want to plant and you've got a bunch of crimson clover that's this tall. Yes, you have to kill that beautiful crimson clover and hoe it in and chop it down. You can carry it away and compost it, but then you have to add that compost back to your garden. Like the point is to kind of keep the nutrients there. You can chop that cover crop down, chop it into the top layer of soil and let it sit for a few weeks and then plant your seeds that you want to put in there. Baby plants don't always love growing right next to freshly dead plants. So it really helps to kill your cover crop and then wait a few weeks and then plant your little plants in there. So that is where the work of the cover crops comes into play. And as you see from this slide, it's easy to just let them get away from you. This was a buckwheat crop that went to seed, which those big, long, tangly stems, like they are a pain to deal with once they get that big. But we made lemons out of lemonade, or rather buckwheat pancakes out of an overgrown buckwheat cover crop. And that worked out. We've done the same thing with rye. Like when the rye got 6 feet tall and we're like, wow, we don't even know what to do with these giant plants anymore. We're just going to grow some rye. I hope that helps. It's not very encouraging, maybe, but it works. It's still fun. It's better than having to deal with a great big stand of weeds growing in your garden and on compacted soil because you didn't plant anything, over the winter. And worst case scenario, if you just want to mulch, spread some alfalfa hay or some reasonable mulch. What's reasonable? Over your garden and then rake that away in the springtime to plant. That's a good stopgap measure. And I do that. I've done that this past year where I didn't have time to establish a cover crop in the fall. I just mulched and it was way better than nothing. Thanks for flagging me down with the questions, Becca. I can't always see them pop up.
Oh, totally. There's a follow-up question here just about the cover crops. When you say kill, do you mean chop off and chop up, till in or hoe in? And will it not just grow back with a new cover crop after that?
Great question. Yes, I mean kill them. I am so ruthless as a gardener. It's been kind of amazing. I'm like, oh, I kill way more plants than I actually nurture as part of this whole process. But yes, kill them, chop them up. And most of these cover crops that I've mentioned, they die pretty easily. That's why they are so famous as cover crops. Like they grow really vigorously and they're easy to kill, at least when they're young enough. Once they start going to seed, they get way tougher. Like the whole balance of energy in the plant shifts and where they're building structure to hold up that plant stem. So you want to get them before they flower. I planted 3 acres of crimson clover cover crop on my rented farmland. And it was so stunningly beautiful when it went to flower that I neglected to hoe it in. Oh my gosh. Yeah, we just grew crimson clover like it was unstoppable by the time it got that big. There was something else about the cover crop, like you hoe them in and then
No, I think that covered it. It was just, won't it grow back? And
they're
you just
usually
said
pretty
that
easy
they
to
die
kill.
really easily.
Yeah. Just chop into those roots. And something like oats will actually winter kill. So I plant oats in the fall, I get this beautiful green, lush growth of oats. And then with a heavy frost or two, they will die and they'll just form their own dead mulch. And then I just rake them away and I plant into them. So that's a nice thing about oats around here. Big old crossword puzzle. It's fun. All these different personalities all interacting in the garden. All right, talked about buckwheat pancakes. So what do you plant into that soil? I use soil blocks, absolutely love them. And there's actually a class, we're doing a class on April 10th that's all the details of starting seeds in soil blocks. It's basically mud pie making. You see here, we've got the spatula and everything in the mud pie kitchen. And here's David using the tiny little brownie bite blocks, and you can put 1 lettuce seed in each of those. And then anytime those plants germinate, we can just plant those little brownie bites in the soil at the spacing we want our lettuce to be. So it really makes garden planning easier. And I'll probably get a plant from every seed that germinates in those soil cubes. So I don't need to plant a bunch of seeds in the soil and then thin them. I can just do the work up front on the trays. So I've really enjoyed the soil block scene, and because it does help me plan the garden and get things planted where I want them fairly reliably. A lot of home gardeners plant seed, and then when it doesn't come up, they're like, oh, I don't know, I must have done something wrong. Well, did you do something wrong, or was it just crummy seed to start with? Like, when they're in the soil blocks, I can keep an eye on them. I know what's happening. It's a lot easier for me to baby a tray of soil blocks and keep them just right and moist and warm enough than it is for me to try to baby a big long row in the garden. So that's one thing I like about the soil blocks. And also just pointing out the hotbed of the home garden revolution. That big soil bench right there is filled with fresh horse manure, which is rotting merrily away, and all the bacteria and fungi in that rotting horse manure actually is heating the soil for those seedlings to start. So that's what's called the hotbed, where you actually have the compost pile heating the soil underneath those baby plants. This was in, early April, mid-April last year. And you see these are little baby cucumber plants who are loving life in that nice warm soil. Way too cold in April to plant cucumbers out, but we were eating cucumbers by the end of May from the little cucumbers planted in the hotbed. So there are all kinds of fun tricks you can do when you get into the garden puzzle making. Like this. This is, I was trying to grow a bunch of squash for the food bank, along with Jim Eichner of Food Bank Farms. And I thought, gosh, people ask me what to do with the squash. How about if we just write it right on there? So you get to play in your garden as your art project. So these are really fun squash to hand out. Like it says right there what to do with a squash. All right, so you want to really watch your garden, as I mentioned. Just have a seat out there. I don't want to do a whole bunch of garden work because I want to have more time to actually sit down and enjoy the garden and watch it and see what the insects are doing. Watch the dragonflies and see how the wasps are flying and what they're hunting. There was a great big wasp nest in my greenhouse last year. It was European paper wasps, not very aggressive to humans, but they were patrolling the lettuce in there and nabbing any tiny caterpillars who were on that lettuce. Those wasps could be considered a pest, but they were actually allies. I mean, I saw them hunting caterpillars right off of my beautiful lettuces. So watching what's going on helps enhance your perspective as a gardener, as an observer. Listen to what's happening. I see over and over again how the gardener's shadow is the best fertilizer, as in your attention helps you do the right thing at the right time and not do more than you have to. And it's an ongoing process. I do liken gardening to playing an instrument because it's a basically simple thing. Seeds go in the ground, you water them, you eat what grows, and it's also something that takes a lifetime to master. Just like you can learn scales, you can learn some basics on the piano or on the guitar, and then it takes a lifetime to master. So that's a little bit of what I think is happening with gardening. And you probably will want to take some notes along the way. And just whatever is helpful. I've gone through a whole variety of note-taking strategies. And it's better to take brief notes over a longer period of time than to take a whole bunch of notes in April and then not take any the rest of the year. If that makes sense, because I have done those things. So I am telling you, and you won't super duper be able to see it, but I have a binder where I have things like alliums 2021. And it's just a blank sheet in a 3-ring binder. And I say which variety I planted where, when. And then I follow up with how that results. Like, how did those plants do? And it gives me great information. For instance, I once planted red bulb Brussels sprouts in July. I thought, is this a little too late? Well, I'm going to go ahead and start a bunch of these red bulb Brussels sprouts. And in November, when I was harvesting Brussels sprouts from the other plants, there were no sprouts on the red bulb Brussels sprouts. I thought, I was right. I planted them too late. I should have known. July is way too late to plant those Brussels sprouts. And then in February, there's another note. The red bulb Brussels sprouts are covered with sprouts right now. And we've already eaten all the ones off the other plants. So July is actually the perfect time to plant those Brussels sprouts. But if I had given up and just yanked those plants in November, I wouldn't have seen that progression through. So the notes can be really helpful from year to year about, well, gosh, when did I plant onions last year? Did I do it in February? Did that seem too early or too late? And so that's the way that you will guide your gardening knowledge over the course of years and become more and more masterful at it. And again, it's whatever is helpful. Some people love planning. Some people can't stand it. find a way for those aspects of yourself to work together. Like I try to plan as much as my planning side will let me, while still offering great outlets for my creative, imaginative side in the garden. You're made out of the soil you eat from. One reason I call myself Alexia of Hawthorn Farm as my little screen name there is because I really am made out of Hawthorn Farm. I have been eating from the soil here for enough years for most of me to be made out of the soil here. I am a little blob of Hawthorn Farm talking to you today. And that is an amazing feeling. It is a feeling on a cellular level that I did not even know was possible before I started gardening, and continuing that process and sticking with it through the tragedies of the rats eating all my barley and popcorn one year, and like through the difficulties of shoveling and hauling and pulling out bindweed and all the other things that are part of interacting with a garden in this way. And of course, I've been talking mostly about annual plants, but there's a whole aspect of gardening with perennials that is another fascinating system and topic as well. I just know that most of us garden mostly with annuals, with annual plants, where you plant a seed, the seed grows, and you harvest the results of that plant within a 1 or 2 year time span. So yeah, enjoy eating wherever you are gardening. And again, if that is a windowsill, fantastic. Like, you can be in relationship with that soil. And if it's 1,000 acres, great. It's all delicious, and the earth needs us paying attention to every crumb. So just cheering you on wherever you are. And was there another question, Becca? Wow. I better get to these resources. Oh my gosh.
No questions yet, but definitely if you have any final questions, please ask them so we can be sure to get to them.
Great. So here are those books I mentioned. Growing Vegetables West of the Cascades by Steve Solomon. I use that. I refer to that book every year. Lots of great veggie by veggie specific information. And The Intelligent Gardener's big soil mineral balancing book that really helped me see how my health was related to the soil that I eat from. So yeah, handbook for the new agriculture, similar soil mineral thing, just a little more geared towards the farmer. Logan Labs and growabundant.com. And then those are seed companies that I get my seed from. Nobody, like, I am sponsored by no one to tell you any of this. I'm just sharing what I use. These are not by any means the only resources out there. I just wanted to point you in a few directions that I have found reliable over the years. And of course, you can look us up at hawthornfarm.org. Always happy to answer questions. And the services tab on our page has a free garden journaling worksheet where you can work through some of those questions for yourself. So plow ahead, just don't actually plow if you can possibly help it. All right, any last questions?
Thank you so much, Alexia, for this program. And thank you everybody who was here today asking such wonderful questions. That you guys being here and asking questions is really what makes these programs great. And we love doing them, and we are excited to continue doing these programs. So I will send out an email with some of these resources, as well as our upcoming classes that we've got, linked to Hawthorn Farms as well. Lots of love for you, Alexia, in the chat right now. Thank you so much.
Gosh, I gotta look at the chat, I guess. And thanks to you, Becca, and all folks at 21 Acres. Just a tremendous support, and so delighted to support your mission and get people with happy soil.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope you all have a great day.
Yeah, you too. Farewell.